What's up, everybody? Want to welcome you back to the Built Different podcast. Pleased to say we have our very first guest of all time, a man who I really appreciate. When I first started this journey, I didn't know if I was insane or, if what I was saying was making sense, but I had an idea. I read his articles. I valued what he said, and what he thought. And yeah, he was the first person I ever talked to about this that gave me the validation that this could be a game changer. So I'm always appreciative to him. I consider him a friend. I
I
respect his
still feel that
work,
way,
and
by the way.
yeah,
I still
I
feel like it's a
appreciate
game
that.
changer. Yeah, oh yeah, man.
I
Absolutely.
appreciate that. But I just value your mindset. I've always valued your mindset and your thoughts on things. I love that you mix the science of human behavior into your work. I think that needs to be done more often. I've called you, a unicorn because you kind of blend those two worlds together and try and build confidence in your fighters. So, with that being said, I appreciate Paul Gavoni for hopping on this call, being our first guest. Thank
Sure,
you.
brother. Glad to be here. Thanks for having me on.
So
I see
yeah,
silent clapping there.
yeah. So you've met Sean before. Obviously, we talked when we were presenting some things to you.
Hmm.
Justin, you haven't met yet. He's a BJJ practitioner. He used to do what was it, kickboxing or Muay Thai? Justin.
It was Muay Thai. I dabbled in a little bit here and there, but
Oh,
I'm
I
more
love Muay Thai,
yeah,
especially the clinch. That's my favorite.
yeah. I was never too good at Muay Thai, so I stick with Jiu-Jitsu now.
Well, if you're gonna stick with one thing, I would stick with jujitsu.
Yeah, thank you.
And also on, kind of helping us produce a show, he's always on Raul Gamboa, one half of Gore Media marketing guys
All
that
right, Raul,
make all
how's it
this
going, brother?
possible, make it beautiful. So yeah, we're all mixed martial arts fans on this call, and obviously we're building a product that we want to use to change the game for mixed martial arts, for other sports, for the world in general. But with that being said, a lot of the ideas that I had, and I ran through you. A lot of the brain picking I did was from a lot of the articles you presented. So, we kind of want to run through a lot of those questions based on a lot of the articles you wrote back in the day and a lot of your philosophies. Um, so, first of all, for our audience that we're building, we wanted to introduce them to you, and we want to know a little bit more about you, what you do, your background, your passions, your books. Could you tell us a little bit more about yourself?
Sure, man. So I actually am a behavior scientist, the science of human behavior or applied behavior analysis. It's the reason, it explains why we do what we do or why we don't do what we do. And It was based off of the work of B.F. Skinner, who essentially said our behavior operates on the environment. It's called operant behavior. So we do things in short to get something or get away from something. It doesn't necessarily mean it's tangible things or socially mediated things, but it just means that there's always a reason. Behavior doesn't just happen willy-nilly for no reason. And so if you understand that, why behavior happens or why it doesn't, and how to arrange the environment in a way, you can get the best out of people, especially when it's through the use of positive reinforcement. If you're behaving, it's because your behavior is under contingency of some sort of reinforcement, either again something added, that's what positive means, or something subtracted, that's what negative means. And so I've used it to work with children with disabilities and my fighters, and of course, I have multiple champions at all different levels, including a world champion. And I also use it to work with organizations and failing schools, organizational behavior management, and to help create an environment again that gets the best performance out of people and builds a positive culture. And that's what I'm all about. I have a dream that one day people are going to come to work and love it, like the same way people come to the mixed martial arts gym and they love it. And people aren't using coercion, and people are using the science to accelerate their own performance. They understand it. There's also your own thoughts are behaviors, but they're just
Oh yeah.
covert behaviors that only you can observe, and et cetera, et cetera. And so I've taken that. My strength in the field. There's some really brilliant people in our field, And what I like is I look at myself as like a interfield disseminator. So I take these things that are kind of complex or in sciencey language, and I break them down into easy to understand and palatable approaches. And there's people that can like get really deep with their analysis, and that's not me. I like to take the practical application of the science of human behavior and share it with people in a way
Mm-hmm.
that where they can again use it to help themselves or use it to help others. So I've done that through a number of things, like including I've written 5 books. One of them's a Wall Street Journal and USA Today bestseller. There's a lot on leadership and coaching. And I have podcasts and all that stuff, man. And I love using it. And so I started when I came into the field. A lot of people were using the science to work with people with disabilities because there's a funding source behind it because they're caring people and they want to help people. And so thankfully the science is there to help them. But I wasn't surrounded with mentors and I wasn't surrounded by a lot of people in the field. I was kind of a slacker, I thought. I wasn't going to conferences and I wasn't reading research, but I'm in the gym training. I'm like, well, I kind of get the science of human behavior, and I need to kind of start looking at what I'm doing through this behavioral lens. And I did. And I did the same thing in the organizations I worked. I picked up a book and I guess the science can be applied to organizations as well. And it turns
Mm-hmm.
out people really weren't doing it in schools. And I use in the schools to turn around family schools that with a team of people, of course, that others weren't able to turn around. Just because when you understand, how behavior works, and everybody thinks they understand how behavior works because people are behaving all the time, including yourself. You tend to maybe engage in behaviors that might not get the best behaviors out of yourself and might not get the best behaviors out of other people because it's just a fundamental misunderstanding. So my passion is sharing it with the world and growing the science in that way so people are more likely to embrace it because a lot of people really misunderstand the science of human behavior. They think of all sorts of aversive stuff and just they think it's about punishment and it's not. They don't understand what punishment is and they don't understand what reinforcement is. They think reinforcement is all about just telling people they're doing a good job, and that's fundamentally not. That might be a reinforcer, might not be. It all depends on its impact on behavior. So they think about the science as behavior modification, and behavior modification comes with this kind of stigma that people are using aversives and shock and making people do something and carrots and whips and all that kind of stuff.
Yeah.
And really we want people to have we want what anything that we're doing to be socially valid, like it's helping people to get in touch with meaningful outcomes for themselves. So that's very important to us, and so I'm trying to put a more of a human side to the science, and that's what I love doing.
So yeah, that you kind of addressed one of my follow-up questions, which is how did you get into it? But how did you get in? What got you into mixed martial arts? And I remember you being the Golden Gloves boxing champion. What drew you to combat sports?
Well, of course, well, first of all, the Karate Kid, which is one of the favorite movie, that and Rocky, of course, I
Yeah,
love the
yeah.
Karate Kid. I still watch it. I still get all emotional at the end when Daniel's up there doing his thing.
The
I just
crane
love
kick,
it. I
yeah.
watch all the seasons. But when I was bullied when I was a kid. And when I say I was bullied, I've had to reflect on this a bit because there are people that go to school every day and man, God bless them, they get incessantly bullied bad
Mhm.
every day, multiple times a day. And these kids are so courageous to show up and go in there. It wasn't like that for me. I came from a rough neighborhood. There was a good friend of mine who was like very skinny, and I would stick up for him and I would get beat up because the kids were all bigger. Moved in, I got a knife held to my throat, end up leaving that neighborhood, moving to a new neighborhood. The very new neighborhood I moved into, the neighborhood bully, I don't know if he was just like I was just a nice kid. I was a sweet kid. And I had good parents, and he beat me up the first day. So I lived in fear of him. And I that same year I was pushed the crosswalk to cross the street to go fishing with my buddy, and car pulls up. Couple of guys hop out that were older than me, and they just punched me in the mouth for like no reason, man, because I made their car stop. And so
Mhm.
finally when I was 14 years old, I went to my first house party. It was like 5 dudes, and 3 of them were like football players and they had been drinking and I didn't drink. And one of the guys says, hit me in the stomach, and I hit him in the stomach and not hard. And he goes, let me hit you in the stomach. And I've always been an athlete, so he hit me in the stomach and I kind of chuckled, like it was no big deal. And he like flipped out. He was a big, huge guy. And he goes, I'm going to kill you. And, so I ran. I ran out the front door and I ran down the street. I think I was on my skateboard and I was knocking on the neighbor's door, like, let me in, like running for my life. And after that, man, I felt like it just left this feeling of just, man, it was humiliating. This thought about running from somebody, and I just felt like less than human. I felt so bad about myself. So the next time this one kid that beat me up the first day, the neighborhood bully beat me up, on the first day on the block, the next time he messed with me, I just let him have it. You know what I mean? I thought to myself, like, and I'm not suggesting this is what other people do. I'm just saying, like, how impactful bullying can be. I thought I'd
Mhm.
rather die than allow somebody to make me feel as bad as I felt before. And so, that was when I was 14. That was right around the time the Karate Kid came out. So I could so much relate. And then when I moved down to Fort Lauderdale, and I went to a club, and my friend, one of my best friends, Chris Frick, he's 6'7", and they were having these Monday night fights, like tough man fights, and he got in there and fought, and a huge crowd, and he ended up taking a beating. But at that time in my life, my girlfriend had dumped me, and I was in a really bad, dark place. And I'd been lifting weights, so I was kind of stocky, and I lived in a rough neighborhood. And there was this guy across the street named Tyrone. He kind of looked like Vander Holyfield. They said, hey, why don't you guys go up there and fight? And I'm like, fuck it. You know what I mean? Let's go. I was just in a bad way. And a friend of mine boxed a little bit and he showed me how to throw a jab. I remember being in this
Mhm.
other guy's backyard and they had a bag hanging from, like, we're in the middle of the hood, man, and I was hitting the bag with the jab and I didn't know much, probably throwing a right hand like I was, throwing a baseball, like a purse, And
Yeah.
so we got up there and fought. And Tyrone was throwing these massive hooks at me, but it was just basic physics. His hooks were falling about that much short of nailing me. And my jab, because I have like gorilla arms, was nailing him every time. After about the first round, I was like exhausted, but he was more exhausted than me. And so, I kept tapping him up with the jab, and like, we got all done. I won. He thanked me for not knocking him out, but in my mind, I'm like, oh, yeah, sure, no problem, man. We're buddies, But really, I was just exhausted. And I can explain this behaviorally, so I feel bad about myself. It doesn't matter that I'm a kind guy and intelligent guy and trying to do the right thing. It seems like our society, especially where we, maybe in the world, but it seems like people really, from the peasants to the king, they really respect the lover and the fighter. And I just got so much reinforcement from the people, like everybody wanted to be my friend, shaking my hands. And for somebody who's like suffering from low self-esteem for whatever reason, it was just intoxicating. And there's got to be something that really drives you to get into like boxing, because it's a brutal sport. It's brutal because you go in there every day and you take a beating, which I did. I walked through the gym on the first day and I took a beating from a professional fighter. He broke my nose. I just got it fixed 2.5 years ago. I mean, bleeding, and every day I'd come back picking blood boogers out of my nose, like taking a beating, because it felt so good for myself. You know what I mean? And for I could walk in anywhere and feel like I can be the nicest guy I want to be. I could be kind. I can shed a tear if I want to, but nobody's gonna fuck with me. Because I know how to fight, and I don't think the world should be that way, but it is. And so, then I went on to continue fighting, and I, moved. My last fight actually fought. I won the Golden Gloves in '98. I came out of retirement to fight in one of the tough mans, like the National Tough Man fight. It was at the Tico Arena, and I write about it in one of my books. I won't tell you how it turned out, but it's in my the 5 Scientific Laws of Life and Leadership. But I write about what happened, because I did get dropped. It's the first time I've ever been dropped. I was the smallest guy in the tournament. The guy that dropped me was 285 pounds, and I was only 200 pounds. So you have to tune in to see how that turned out. And then I moved over to mixed martial arts. I thought, you know what, getting hit in the head by, guys that are almost 300 pounds isn't like that great of a thing to do. And I found mixed martial arts to be safer, believe it or not, than boxing, because you're not just getting hit in the head constantly. It's like
Mhm.
physical chess. And I'm not saying that it's not hard on the body. So I moved over to that, and I ended up getting hurt, but not brain hurt, tore my ACL, broke some bones, collarbone, just all sorts of stuff, man. So that was like I came home one day after broken collarbone. My wife was just in tears crying because in her mind, like, I mean, I almost broke my neck. And that was it. I hung up, my aspirations to, fight anymore. And I still trained, but I slowly shifted into releasing my dreams of being an athlete, to being a coach. And that's how the transition went. And of course, I've been all over the world coaching. It's been good to me for somebody who's just been a part-time coach. I've done, very well, and I attribute that to the science.
No, that's amazing. Yeah, I think throughout all of our conversations, I never found out what got you into it, but it's a lot of guys' stories are being bullied or having to find that outlet. But the beautiful thing, you didn't run anymore. That's the greatest thing. You never had to look back and never running anymore from anybody. So
No, no, yeah, no, it does feel good, and I'll never. Yeah, there's none of that. Mm-mm.
so yeah, where we wanted to transition now was getting more into how you applied the science to and your thought process on things from weight cutting to training how you train the fighters, how you build their confidence and things like that. So want to go and pass that on to Justin. Did you want to kind of ask Paul about some of the questions about weight cutting?
Right.
Yeah,
So,
and please call me Paulie, fellas. My friends call me
Paulie.
Paulie. Yeah.
okay.
All right.
So Paulie, yeah. So Ricky sent me some of your articles, and I was reading them, and I was fascinated by everything that you mentioned. Just because, as a fan of the sport, I don't really see like the analytical side of it or like the human behavior side of it. So it was very interesting to read. And one thing that you mentioned in one of your articles is you were talking about weight cutting and how that's like the quality of a fighter's weight camp is the largest predictor of a fighter's performance. And
Mhm.
of course, a weight cut is part of that pre-fight sort of process. So can
Yeah.
you kind of talk about like how, in your experience, how have you seen weight cuts affect a fighter's performance in training camp and during fight night in terms of like durability or endurance, conditioning, things like
Yeah.
that, like performance factors. How has weight cutting affected that in fighters you've trained?
Well, I mean, so I bet the standard is about you cutting 5 to 8% of your weight can be okay. When we talk about weight cut, what we're really talking about is like dehydrating your body. The old school mentality, and there's some merit to it, is that you need to be the biggest guy in the smallest weight class. But that can have issues. So I have an extreme example, and it happened to be one of my fighters, and it was a scary thing, man, because people died cutting weight. I mean, you are dehydrating your body, and like these guys would be in the sauna, and they won't even sweat anymore because they've gotten every ounce of water out of their body. And so one of my good friends, great friends, one of the best guys I know, UFC fighter, he was ranked #2 in the world at one point, beat Demetrius Johnson, Brad One Punch Pickett. Just a great individual. So he did a stint. He fought at 135, and he did a stint where he dropped down to 125. Now he was already shredded at 135, and he was walking around at about 155. And so he decided to try to get down there because they were having the Ultimate Fighter show, and Demetrius Johnson was going to be there, and he was the only fighter at the time to ever beat Demetrius. And he thought, well, let me jump down to 125. If I beat this guy and do well, I can get on the show. And so it was a calculated risk. So the entire camp, he was in a terrible mood. I mean, he was like eating like birds, like just he trained so hard, but his performance was suffering because he wasn't getting enough nutrients in him, right? And if your performance suffers in camp, well, then that's going to have a negative impact on your mentality, right? Because you're going to be like, I'm not performing well, so that hurts your self-efficacy. And at one point, I brought him down to Florida Atlantic University just to check what his fat percentage was, and like it was like and we were still, I don't know, he was 143 pounds or something like that. And we were at like 5.8% body fat or something like that. And he was just shredded. There was nothing left to take. And so if you can imagine, we show up to make the cut, and it's just brutal. It's in the sauna, out of the sauna, putting him under a towel, sweating, back in, back out, getting every ounce. And like when we're done making the cut, I mean, I'm like almost having like to push him up. I remember like going upstairs and having to, because he's just physically exhausted. And so he made weight because he's a professional. And in the fight, it was like these guys that are at this lower weight, they're like birds. You know what I mean? They're meant, their bones are meant to be that light. So Brad was just a step slower, you know. So being the bigger guy in the smaller weight class worked against them because the speed was just at a different level. And he was never that speedy to begin with. Um, and so it ended up hurting us because he was just getting hit with punches that he wasn't used to seeing the speed. So, you know, it just, you know, a 5 to 8% uh, from whatever your normal walk around is, you know. So, like, if so, let's say it's a week out where you have your camp, whatever your weight is there, then you can start, you know, making that cut. And you know, there's a process for it. Like it comes from bodybuilding where you water load. So you put a lot of water in your body, so your body says, I don't need all this water, and it starts to expel it. And you know, and then you end up, you know, tricking your body to get rid of all the water. You sweat out the rest on weigh-in day, and that's the deal, you know. But the weight cut is very you know, it can be a very dangerous thing. And like, you know, champions are made in the right weight class. And you know, that was proof of that was with Brad dropping down. That just was not the right weight class for him.
And then so like you kind of touched on this a little bit in your answer just now, but like the mental impact of cutting weight too. You said that it can affect like a fighter's mood in training camp. It can affect their confidence, you said. Can you talk a little bit more about like the mental side of it?
Yeah, big time, man. So we really, when we're talking about confidence, we're talking about self-efficacy, and that's your belief in your ability to, you know, accomplish a task. And this is like really important because the more you believe, the more likely that you will be to achieve those outcomes. And the belief is not built, you know, just by saying believe. It's built from, you know, it is built from feedback, right? We would call these antecedents in our field. They're meant to get behavior going right. So people are telling you doing a great job, right? You're also observing other people doing it. And you're like, all right, that guy can do it, I can do it, right? But the most important thing is getting having mastery experience. In other words, being successful, right? And the more you're successful incrementally towards some sort of goal and achieving some sort of task, the more likely you will be to engage in that task. So there's that piece of it. And so when you are, if you're performing and you're a step behind in your camp, you're sparring and I mean, you know, we're sparring with the greatest fighters in the world, you know, and so if you're a step behind, you're getting hit more, you're getting taken down more, you're getting submitted more. And that's going to have an impact on your self-efficacy in whatever area that it is, whether it be your defense or your offense, your grappling, your striking. And of course, now if that plants that seed of doubt, now you're going into the fight and like you can't, your responses need to be automatic. If there's a seed of doubt and there's that little bit of a delay, that's the difference, man, you know, of, you know, winning and losing, getting hit, getting not hit. And so your camp becomes extremely important. It's a huge predictor of your success in the fight, you know. And of course, at the elite levels that, you know, my guys are fighting at, you know, there's very little room for error. Does that make sense?
Yeah, absolutely. Mental side of it's a very big part of the training camp.
It really is. You know, the you know, the mental side needs to be trained. And there's different ways to do it, like, you know, using videos, you know, so you can observe yourself and having a target skill that you're looking at. And I actually have some of my fighters collecting data on themselves. And you know, anybody can tell a fighter what to do, right? So training is about skill acquisition, giving them the skills to do what they need to do. Coaching is about supporting the transference of those skills into the natural environment. So I can show you what to do and you can drill it, right, Justin? But now I gotta get you to perform it in the actual fight. And so we connect the actual fight to the training in your like grappling, like your sparring, right? And your roles with people. And so we need to set up conditions where if it's a new skill, for example, it's like growing up a baby skill. So you need to grow up and send them out in the real world to, you know, be successful in their job. But you got to get it there, right? And so if I teach you, let's say, to slip a punch or do an arm bar, right? And I put you in there with somebody who's like a black belt. And I'm not saying there's no reason to go with a black belt, but you're never going to have the opportunity to engage in repetitions to do that. So your self-efficacy is going to be very low there. You know, you might not even tempt it.
Right.
because you're not going to waste the energy because you're just going to want to defend. But if I put you in a situation where it's somebody who's, relatively close to your skills, or maybe a little bit less than your skill because it's a new skill for you, and I say the only thing you can do, Justin, is do an arm bar, right? You can defend this, and now it's putting you in a situation where you have to set up that arm bar so that you get high repetition in trying to perform the arm bar. And now, as a coach, I can ask you some questions to give you some prompt and get you to engage in the right behavior. So now you successfully complete that arm bar. And once you do, that's getting you in touch with reinforcement. And the more you do it, the more your self-efficacy builds. And the more likely you are to create this habit because you're getting in touch with reinforcement. And the more that it becomes habitual, the more likely you will be to perform in the fight, because when you're under very stressful conditions, you're going to fall back on the old habits. And this is why a lot of people learn something new, but they're not going to do it in the fight because it just has to be a habit. It needs to be automatic. You can't be thinking about something. You're going to perform on these core habits. Does that make sense?
Yeah, so it's confidence is like a skill. Like you have to train it up. You have to make it become like second nature for you.
That's right. And the coach, it's up to the coach to arrange the environment to build that confidence, right? And you have to build it with a skill. It's each skill. You can't look at winning. You need to look at the skill. Maybe you lost that fight in the arm bar. You got submitted, but maybe you attempted 3 arm bars, and that's great, because before you were only attempting 1. And then, maybe you finally get the arm bar, right? So it's like looking at these accomplishments, even putting yourself in a position where you got the arm bar would be a big thing, right? So you really have to look at accomplishments that are leading, right? These leading indicators, they need to be like these metrics that show you that you're moving in the right direction. And those metrics can then serve as a reinforcer for you, like, oh, I'm getting a little bit better. I'm getting a little bit better. Even though I'm not winning, it's not about winning. It's about performing. And if we perform well, the outcome will be winning.
Right. It's like baby steps, essentially.
That's exactly right.
Right. Oh, Ricky, I think you have the next question.
Yeah. So, going back to weight cuts again, Paulie. What do you think? Because these penalties now, UFC 25%. Other organizations have different structures, but what do you think the penalty should be? Especially seeing given the circumstance that you just presented, where Brad had to work his ass off to get down to 125. What do you think the penalty should be for fighters that do miss weight? What should be the consequence?
Yeah, I think the opponent should have like a choice, and I think there definitely should be a financial consequence to it. And I think probably like if you in an organization, there also should be like a consequence to them if there's a pattern of it, because stuff happens. You know what I mean? People get sick and this and that. That you just never know. Sometimes people's body just shut down, even though they've been at a good camp and that weight cut and they were on weight and everything's going well. Their body responded poorly. But I do think that if it happens, there should be a nice chunk of their money goes to the opponent, not the commission, to the opponent, right? And they have a choice whether they can take the fight or not. I think that might be one way. Now, I'm sure there's some pros and cons to doing that, but it's not professional, but things do happen. And I think it needs to be within a limit, because maybe somebody says, oh, you know what, I'll give away half my purse. It's great to not have to cut that 5 pounds. I mean, like a reasonable, miss of the weight, within, a pound or, maybe 2 pounds. And maybe it's like, maybe there's a percentage, the more percentage you're off, the more the purse that gets taken out. So there's probably some systematic way to approach that. I mean, there's a lot the science can do, like with not just that, because that becomes an aversive and people want to avoid that aversive and they know it's very predictable, and also the opponent can turn down the fight. I think that should be something for them. So there's got to be some sort of contingencies for it. I think, by the way, the science, you didn't ask me this question, but I think the science could really help in fights by scoring them, by the way. So you have 5-minute rounds, especially in mixed martial arts. 5 minutes is a long time to judge, right? And people have a bias towards the end of the rounds. It's what they have, short memories.
Yeah.
So it would be so simple to just break these up into intervals. I mean, like imagine having a button in your hand and you get a little buzz and it says, who won that round? Who won that 30 seconds? This opponent or that opponent, right? So it's every 30 seconds it judges that, and you can put it. And if like maybe it like they majorly won the round. Maybe you hit it twice. There's a way to do that, so you're scoring it by the intervals, and that's going to also, I think, improve the action rather than waiting to the end of the round. It's going to take out like a lot of like bias because you got to score it, and I think also probably it should be transparent, so that gets rid of any crookedness. So what? Let how exciting would it be if I know I'm really down and the coach says they're looking at the score and like you're down. It happens in jiu-jitsu all the time. You can see your
Yeah.
points, right? You know how many points you are. So why not put that metric out so a fighter can rally and say, I'm really down. I need to come out and try to knock this guy out. I think it would only be good for the sport. And with technology, they can completely do that, just score it, break it down to intervals, shorter intervals, 30 seconds. Who won that 30 seconds? Doesn't that make simple sense?
Oh yeah.
Yeah, they I know Texas, the boxing commission, I think they give you the score after a certain amount of rounds, so you kind of know where you're at, but that's the only state that I've heard that
Yeah, and
does
why do
something
that? And
like
by
that.
the way, your metrics could totally be a game changer, right?
Yeah.
These in the right spot, you would learn how people landed, how
Hmm.
hard they're landing, how many times they're being hit. We could
Yeah.
totally put this in that where it's unbiased, what I mean, or have that be weighted, right? So this is heavily weighted and somebody else is scoring ring generalship or something like that. So there's a
Hmm.
way to that it could, you could have a really scientific approach to boxing that could, or mixed martial arts that could revolutionize things, especially the way that with your wearable technology, so it can, measure impact as well. That would be huge.
Yeah. Yeah, no, that's we want to, that's where we value the conversations with you because we have a lot of ideas and obviously I've ran quite a few by you, but yeah, definitely have another podcast on that where we can kind of talk about those in more depth as well. So I want to pass it off to Sean. I know he had some questions for you also.
Sure. Yeah, my question was kind of still on the weight cutting idea, but more on like stress and like stress, obviously in moderation, fine. Everyone has stress in their life. But in excess of it, just like anything else, can be problematic. And I know in one of your articles, you were talking about how weight cutting can be an additional form of stress, especially if done incorrectly. Is there any way that you like have seen that or are able to quantify that, like when you've been training fighters during a camp?
You mean quantify stress?
Yeah.
Well, so I don't know if you guys had written this article. It's one of the last ones I think I wrote. It was called acting to overcome anxiety, fear and anxiety. It's been a while since I've written some of those articles, right? So there's a scientific approach to addressing your fears and anxiety called acceptance commitment training or acceptance commitment therapy. And you think about it as the science of mindfulness, right? I want you to imagine like we have like right now we have 5 boxes, but imagine the 4 boxes in front of us, right? We have these visuals, 4 boxes. And the bottom right hand box are your values, like who and what's important to you, a way of being and doing, like, winning is a value, being kind, respectful, performing well, right? There's these things that are what we call automatic reinforcers. Now, in the bottom left-hand corner are all these thoughts and feelings and bodily sensations that show up that only we can see, right? Those are covert behaviors. Only we are aware of what's going on inside of our body. Now, the problem is sometimes when we feel a certain way, we engage in behaviors, right? These overt behaviors that lead us away and make us that help us to feel better, right? It's why people drink. That's why they do drugs. It's why when they get pissed off at their spouse, they yell, although they value having a good relationship, right? And so we do that because of the relief it provides us. It feels good to not have fear. It feels good to not have anxiety. It feels good to get that anger out, right? Does that make sense? Right. So we behave in
Yeah.
these ways in the top left-hand corner to get through it. And they're negatively reinforcing our behavior. And because it's immediate, we do it more and more. But the problem is that as we do it, we're winning the battle, but losing the war because it might move us further and further away from what we very much value, right? In that bottom right-hand corner. So what's the secret? Well, cognitive behavioral therapists will say, change your thoughts to change your behavior, right? Fighters fear doing this and that, well, stop thinking that way, think differently, think about all the positive outcomes, right? And then, behave differently. But, and there's some good research to support CBT. So there's not a knock on it, but this is just more of a behavioral approach, right? This is the science of human behavior. Cognitive behavioral therapy is not this based in the science of human behavior. This is. So what we say is be aware of your thoughts, Be aware that your thoughts and feelings, right, and bodily sensations are precursors to these types of behaviors, right? The behaviors that win the battle but to lose the war. They move you away from, what you really value, right? And instead of trying to change your thoughts and feelings, well, that's like wasting energy. That's like holding a ball underwater, right? And you're focused on that ball. What we want you to do is focus on the behaviors, top right-hand corner now of the matrix. What behaviors you need to engage in that are going to move you closer to your values, right? So the whole thing is engage in the behaviors. You engage in those behaviors, it's going to produce valued outcomes for you. It's going to produce this reinforcement for you. And as you produce more reinforcers, right, like that self-efficacy, the more you're successful, the more you're having mastery experiences, the less likely you are to have this fear and anxiety, right? It's like a byproduct. The fear and anxiety starts to go down as you're getting in touch with more success or getting closer to your values. Does that make sense, everybody?
Yeah.
And so that's the first fight, man. The first fight for fighters and combat athletes is overcoming their self. And if you get stuck in that bottom left-hand corner and then engage in these behaviors, avoid it. And, fighters will do all sorts of things, including perseverating on it, right? Just stuck up in their mind in this vicious loop. And it's like, this is not what we need to do. Be aware that you're stuck right now. Now that we're aware of it, now what do we need to do? We need to eat well. We need to train well. We need to go to camp. We need to watch videos, we need to prepare the best we can. And we need to accept it's like carrying the monkey on our back. We need to spar, and we need to spar using what I call prescriptive sparring, right? And the coach should arrange for all that stuff. But the more we do that, regardless of that monkey in your back, the more likely we are to get in touch with our values. You're going to perform well, you're going to be safer. We value being safe in there, we value not being hurt. We don't want to get knocked out. There are all these things that we value, but the trick is being aware of that and knowing and engaging in the right behavior. Does that make sense?
Yeah, completely.
Yeah.
I'll pass it off to Justin.
So, Paulie, something else that I think it kind of builds off of what we were talking about earlier with practicing and developing like skills is in your articles, you talk a lot about like deliberate practice and like finding the optimal zone of functioning. You were saying that it's a very important for a coach to help the fighter find their optimal zone in training. Can you talk a little bit about like first, how did you learn about like deliberate practice and the optimal zone of functioning? And then what sort of like biometrics and like performance metrics do you think are the most important for a coach to help their fighter find their optimal zone?
Okay, so first of all, I want to say that when the optimal zone, I wrote these articles with another guy, Dr. Alex Edmonds, who's been a mentor to me in many ways. He actually introduced me to deliberate practice and optimal zone of functioning. I wrote a book following understanding what deliberate practice was called deliberate coaching, right? So deliberate practice is about just deliberately engaging in a skill with repetition, like being aware and think about it. Like, let's say an important skill, right? A fundamental skill in any combat sport is turning your hips, right? We got to turn our hips when we kick and we have to punch, right? And understanding that piece of it. Oh shoot, go back. I was talking about deliberate. Yes. So I need you to be aware of that, right? So you have to think about it at first, right? To make sure if I'm teaching you to pivot your back foot, right? I need you to think about pivoting that back foot and do it over and over and think about it. So not being lazy in your thoughts, right? And the more you think about it, the more you engage in the behavior. And in the future, the more it's going to become automatic, right? So you have to first think about those steps that you just learned when you're taught how to do a triangle, right? Step 1, step 2, step 3. But the more you deliberately practice that, the more it becomes automatic, right? So what we're doing is building fluency. That's the deliberate practice part. The optimal zone of functioning, here's what I can say about that. Now, I actually work with Dr. Edmonds. He and I work with Brad Pickett. And what we did was so interesting, man. We still talked about publishing this. We broke down. We focus on like say 5 combinations with him. Okay, 5 combinations that I have him doing repetition, and we set up. It was 5-minute rounds, 5-minute rounds, and we hooked him up to I forget what it was. It was it's called a Zephyr. And it collected all sorts of biofeedback on him, heart rate, had accelerometer on it, all sorts of stuff. I can't really remember. But now, what we did was I could go back and I could see how stressed he was engaging in a certain combination compared to others. Like I knew that this combination was really stressful on his body. His heart rate was higher. He was having a hard time with it. And what that tells me from a behavioral perspective is that he's not fluent in that skill, right? Because he's got to think about it some more. It's not coming automatic to them. And so he's not performing well using that skill. And so what would I do there? If it was an important skill and the skills that we chose were important, then I know we need to give him more repetition, whether it be more deliberate practice with it, right? Create drills for them. We target it as what I call prescriptive sparring, so that he's engaging like in maybe just a few skills while he's sparring, and set up so the opponent's not throwing all sorts of stuff at him, making sure that he's an opportunity to engage in these skills. So he's actually getting in some contact with reinforcement for him. And this is how we make it so he's more fluent in those kind of behaviors. Now, as far as now going back to the optimal zone of functioning, I won't want to speak to that because that's out of my wheelhouse. That is more for sure Dr. Alex Edmonds. So that's my guy, man. Maybe we'll have him on next time.
Yeah, totally. Absolutely. I think Ricky, you had the next question.
Yeah, so for this particular podcast, we'd love to have you back on, and Dr. Edmonds as well. But I think we'll wrap up with this last question, Paulie. I think you kind of touched on a little bit with some of the work you did with Dr. Edmonds, but some of the tools that you guys would use, you mentioned the Zephyr, but some of maybe the tools that you would use to train your fighters, some of the tools that maybe you would use in weight cutting. I know you mentioned the sauna, but was there anything else like technology based that you would use to train and weight cut?
Yeah, I mean,
Your
the
fighters?
Zephyr was a powerful one, man. Being able to really get some, almost real time data, see how the heart rate was performing, look at trends over time to see what's going on. That was like really important. But not to me, that technology should be everywhere. Here's the technology that could be everywhere because it's inexpensive. Everybody can do it. And that is everybody has a phone, right? Everybody has video. And if you break down, if you target a couple skills as a fighter with your coach, right? You say, okay, here's what we're going to work on. We're going to deliberately practice skill. We're going to drill it, right? I'm going to create some prescriptive sparring for you now that which is again just it's like a prescription, we're just going to work on these couple things and then I'm going to get you to spar. Now, if you have your fighter go back and analyze it, break it down to intervals and see, let's say how many times that they were jabbing a certain jab, right? Or throwing a certain combo, right? If we're trying to up the frequency or, making sure that the pivoting the back foot when they throw the right hand, when the fighter has to go back and observe themselves under those conditions, it's literally like strengthening the neural pathways. They have to think about it.
Yeah.
They have to see when they're successful, when they're not successful, maybe see what the antecedents are. Like, when did I throw that punch or when did I get hit? Oh, I notice I'm getting hit when I'm doing this thing and we worked on this and I need to do that. Just having a fighter observe themselves and not just watch themselves. They have to know specifically what they're looking at. I've worked with fighters in camp for like months. And then I said, oh, we need to break this down, right? I need you to score yourself with that. The one scoring session, and when they saw that, oh my God, I got hit 25 times using this strategy. And you've been telling me to change that. But when I counted it, when I saw it for myself, it had a major impact on the likelihood that they would engage in the behavior next time. And so I've completely changed people's styles just using that simple technology.
Yeah.
Does that make
So
sense? Yep.
no, it makes
Self,
100%
yeah,
sense.
self-scoring, right? Watching video of the people self, right? And so you can also use video to see yourself and compare yourself to an expert, how you are performing next to the expert with a particular skill. So that becomes very powerful. So I'm a big fan of video. In combat sports, there's so many people who just want to fight and they're tough. But if you look at almost every pro sport other than this, at least team sports a lot, and I know this is an individual sport, but people are studying tape and they need to
Hmm.
study tape. They need to study, patterns of their opponents. They need to study themselves. They need to have targeted skills that they're working on in preparation for a particular fight. And this is going to, increase the likelihood that they're going to produce a valued outcome for them. And also when you're watching video, it's like training, but it's
Hmm.
training without injuring yourself. So that's why I wrote with Alex these articles on smart camps. It's like we need to train smarter in combat sport. There's a lot of people being hurt out there and they're doing a lot of damage to their body and it's unnecessary. We don't want them to train harder in most cases, not that they shouldn't train hard, but we want people to train smarter. And this is where I think technology can come in because they should have like a dashboard in front of them, right? they're constantly seeing, because this way they know that if they're overtraining or undertraining, the coach can see, if they're pushing themselves to, their maximum heart rate, and they can check to see how they're recovering, and make adjustments and tune their engines up, and know if they're, if there's technology, know that they're getting hit more or getting hit less. That immediate feedback becomes really powerful. For example, if I'm trying to teach somebody to increase their power, right? How do they know that they increase their power? But if I had technology that says when you hit the bag and you turn your hip and pivot to the back foot, and they see like, man, I just increased my punching power by 100 pounds per square inch, or however the measure is, that's a powerful reinforcer, and it's going to increase the likelihood that people train that way and do that into a fight. So it's about getting people having a pinpointed behavior, having some sort of metric, right? Having some sort of feedback that gives that metric to the fighter and to the coach. And it's about the reinforcer. Is the outcome, right? That feedback, is it reinforcing to them, or does it mean they need to change something? Does that make sense?
Yeah, 100% sense. And no, I appreciate you saying that, because that's, where we want to pivot our next conversation. If we're lucky enough to have you as a guest again, the Smart Training Camp articles were really exciting to me. I love those. And it helped, sharpen and refine some of my thoughts on what we're building. And yeah, you touched on it. That all the things that you mentioned are things that we're trying to build. And obviously, you've been privy to what we're building and our technology and a lot of ideas. So, you're speaking my language with what you just said. So, um, with that being said, unless Justin, Sean, Raul, you guys had anything else before we wrap up? Anything you wanted to ask or say before we close out for this episode?
Thank you for being our first guest.
My pleasure, fellas. I believe in what you're doing. I think it's very important for many reasons. And I think, if I were you, once you have it, you really you need a fighter, right? And a coach to use it, produce the valued outcomes, and then you just blast that everywhere. I think what you guys are pursuing is very neat, not just in combat sports, but anywhere. But like, combat sports is in the dark ages. So I would suggest to anybody's listening, if you guys want, you should probably drop some of those articles in the show notes when you post this, so they have something to reference.
Yeah, and with that being said as well, we wanted to we introduced you to our audience. We also wanted to let them know where they can find you, let them know about some of your books and everything, where they can get that, and how they can connect with you.
Yeah, if you can, maybe you just drop the best way to get me on LinkedIn. I have, a lot of connections there. So if you can drop that in there, you can follow me on Instagram at Dr. Paulie Gloves. If you can drop that link in there as well. I mean, all my books are on Amazon. I have this is, if you want to see the science at work, there's the MMA science book. We actually created a whole belt ranking approach for gyms, where it's actually measurable. It's not just subjective based on somebody's opinion. You can actually score whether somebody achieved the belt or not. So it's just a basic application of science for coaching or self-coaching, right? Getting people to, understand how their own performance works. So all my stuff is on Amazon. Just Google my name on Amazon. And if you like leadership, if you like coaching, if you like education, I do a lot of stuff in education. There's that on LinkedIn. I have over 100 articles. I have a YouTube channel. If you can drop that in there as well, it's called Heart and Science. And yeah, man, I'm available I do remote coaching with people. And, again, this is an organization, executive coaching. I have a colleague, Anika Costa, and we go in there and we help organizations, do assessment, use some organizational behavior management stuff to help them improve. So, if that sounds interesting to you, I do keynote talks on leadership and coaching as what I excel at. So, if you're interested, holler at me.
For sure. Again, thank you for your time. We look forward to, we had a bunch of other questions we want to ask you, but you gave us so much information, wealth of information, and these answers we're unable to get to them. But yeah, if you guys enjoyed this podcast, look forward to the next one. We'll be blasting it out, and yeah, we'll get him back on again, and we'll get into even more really, really cool stuff. So, with that being said, for Raul, for Sean, Justin, Paulie, I'd like to thank you guys for joining us today, and hope you guys have a wonderful rest of your evening, and happy holidays to everybody.
Thanks for having me, fellas.
Thank you.
Thank you.